The book of Hebrews has many lessons on faith, and we have to be grateful to God that it was left there to help us to know how important it is, if we are truly going to be Christians, to trust in God. You know, looking at verse 8, we read, "By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going." What is faith? Verse 1 told us is the evidence of things you hope for. So if you believe the one who has made the promise, then you actually believe it as good as done. So you do whatever needs to be done to obtain the promise. So because Abraham had faith, he started moving, and he did not know exactly where. Then verse 9 says, "By faith he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents as did Isaac and Jacob, who are heirs with him on the same promise." Now you are in the land, but you are not the big nation you have been promised. You can't fight the people around you. So you sit there knowing it is the land of promise, but you don't have the realization of your promise. So, right from the beginning, we see faith defined, verse 1 and 2. Then we see why faith is important from verse 3 all the way to verse 6. Then from verse 7 we see faith during a pilgrimage as he is traveling. That's what we are seeing in verse 7 and 8. But it goes on to emphasize this pilgrimage, that because of that faith, they are able to stay there knowing it will happen, but it hasn't happened. Is that one of your problems? You are told promise heaven, but you haven't seen the heaven. You are promised healing, but you haven't seen the healing yet. You are promised to pass an exam, but you haven't seen it happen. How do you live in between the promise and the realization of the promise? Only faith can make you be at home when it's not exactly what you had hoped for, but you know one day you will realize. Look at verse 10. "For he was looking forward to the city with the foundations, whose architect and builder is God." He knew there is a temporary promise, but there is something God is promising on the long term. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was unable to bear children because she considered him faithful who had the promise. A lady of that age, if she didn't believe God could do it, she would even refuse any relationship with her husband that could have brought in the baby. Well, they know it can't happen biologically. But faith tells you, it's true, it cannot happen naturally, but God has said. So you do it not because you can produce scientific evidence, because you trust the one who has actually said. And they actually finally got a baby. Verse 12 says, "And so from this one man, and he as good as dead," not dead physically, but dead sexually, "came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore." That's what had been promised. And it happened. Now Jews are all over the world. And it came from that one man who was too old to have children, with a wife too old, well past menopause. But they trusted. So God can make a promise. But if you don't have a trust, you will not do what is necessary to realize that promise. So you can see faith will help you in your pilgrimage. Faith will help you in the waiting process to see God fulfill what he has actually promised to fulfill, because that is That will be very important. Father Abraham, the father of faith, knew the one who was promised. The land he was in may have been difficult for him as a stranger, but he knew it was promised by God. So he sat there, seeking God. Once earth is what you think is home, Christians cannot enjoy the thought of heaven. But once you know that you are going to heaven, you can actually live under a few discomforts, knowing it is temporary. You have a home in heaven. And Abraham, in the process, he left not a rich man when he left his land, but in Canaan he grew exceedingly rich. But riches do not affect his faith. He trusted in God to move out of the land of Chaldeans. He trusted God when he had no much property. He grew rich. He still trusted God. Riches and wealth did not affect his trust in God. He knew he's valuable to God, with or without wealth. That God means good for him, with or without wealth, and that one day God will fulfill his promise. Look at verse 13. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. If truth be told, by the time Abraham dies, they are not a nation. By the time Isaac dies, they are not a nation. By the time Jacob dies, they are becoming many, more than 100. But the truth is, they are not a nation. All these people died knowing it will happen. They were so sure that both Joseph, the son of Jacob, said, I'm so sure you are going to form the nation. I don't know when, but it will happen. That you better embalm my bones, so that when finally it happens, and it actually happened 400 years later, they actually took the bones to Israel. So these people, what they're telling us, died still believing. They never lost their hope. And I think that's one of the things you learn, to not allow your hope to fail because of waiting rather long. Verse 14 says, people who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Yeah, Abraham, all this land and the troubles he's having in Canaan and Egypt, he would have decided, I better go back to my relatives. But he didn't. Why? He knew what God had promised. One day, even this land will be my land. But maybe not in my lifetime. But I believe in him. He trusted in God. Because of that kind of picture, God knows that they fully trust him. So God is not ashamed of people who live by faith and practice that faith. These people whom God is not ashamed of are people who live by faith right up to their death, and when death comes, they still trust him. When pain comes, they still trust him. When bad circumstances come, they still trust him. So in the process, they become partakers of God's promise. And my prayer is that we'll be those people whom God is not ashamed of, because we trust God irrespective of the circumstances. Yes, we may be regarded as strangers on earth, because the things we are doing, the things we are saying, the things we are believing, the people around us do not believe we should be living like that or believing them. But that does not change the fact that we trust in God fully. You know, if your car, as an example, was taken, would you be less happy because you no longer have a car? Is your happiness and joy tied up to a property somewhere, or to a piece of gadget somewhere, or to your mobile working? If your mobile starts working, there will be certain inconveniences, but will you lack joy? These people did not receive the things they wanted, but they continued in joy. No wonder God is not ashamed to be called their Father. You know, I think it's important to ask yourself where you stand on such issues. Let me just read verse 15 again. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have an opportunity to return. Is your Christianity, I want to backslide. Is this God worth trusting? Or do you fully trust Him? So like the three Hebrew children we are told about, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, can face the king and tell him, our God can rescue us from your hands. But even if He chooses not to rescue us, we trust Him, not you. That's what makes God not ashamed to be called their Father. I think that will be important. Are you a Christian because of circumstances, or you have chosen to be a Christian? You need to enjoy the things God has given you, but don't get tied to them. Enjoy the earth, but use it as a stepping stone to heaven, that you know there is actually a heaven to go to. Just look at, so we've seen that faith can help you trust in the future. It can deal with the fact that there are things you are hoping for, but are not happening, have not happened yet, but you believe one day they will happen. So in the meanwhile, and the meanwhile can be very mean, you will still be at peace because you trust in God. Look at verse 17. And it now lists faith, the victories that came up from people who trusted. The victories of faith, we can call it. Look at verse 17. It says, by faith Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promise was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. What are we learning? That there is that people who have practiced faith have seen victory. You know, Abraham is seen as a man of faith. He believed God so much that when God asked for the son to die, and yet God is the one who has said he is going to give a family through Isaac, but now he wants to kill him. He wants him killed. He thought, I'm not God's advisor. I'll do what he wants. How he sorts out the other promise, I leave it to him. So he was able to do that which human beings would find difficult to do. And yet he was a very human person. So he tried to kill his son Isaac, but Isaac rescued him. I think that's an important thing to see as you think about faith. So faith not only helps you to walk in the future and be at peace, it also helps you to not feel desperate. Because killing a baby, the whole of your hopes are gone. But somehow you believe God can raise the dead. I don't know what God will do, but He will do something. So you are able to obey God, which is what Abraham actually did. Look at verse 20. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. In other words, because he trusted in God, that is the father, he in the process was able to bless his children regarding their future. And that is something that we need to have at the back of your mind as you live. So Abraham is a very, very good example of trusting in God in very difficult circumstances. And my hope and prayer is that every time you are going through a testing, think about the testing. Just think again. Why would Abraham be willing to kill his son? It's because he trusted God would keep his promises in other ways if he decides this is not the way to do it, including getting the guy from the dead. God has no limitations of any nature. Which limitations are you actually placing on God? And in the process, you end up in trouble because you cannot enjoy your faith. So Jacob, so we have seen Isaac is blessing Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. Very clear about who will be who. Then in verse 21, by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Jacob's sons and worshipped as he leaned on his staff. He was so old. He was leaning on his staff. But when it came to blessing, he was clear there is a future. In the future, the younger will serve the older. Just like had happened in his own case. Verse 22 says, by faith Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instruction concerning the burial of his bones. That's how sure he was. And like I said, 43 years later happened. Look at verse 23. By faith Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. How would you take a baby, put it in something that can float, knowing that if they discover it's you, they will kill you also for disobeying the king's order? But what are we expecting? That if God be God, he will organize for some of these people can be rescued by the Pharaoh or his people. And so it was everything very well arranged. You can see the Miriam, the sister of the baby, available to advise the princess that knows a woman who happens to actually to be the mother of Moses. And so Moses is able to grow both in Pharaoh's culture and also in Jewish culture, which made him better prepared for the job he was going to do later in life. But there will be faith. There will be faith to do what others are not doing, to take risk. You have to have faith. And I think that's what Jochebed had, the mother of Moses. Faith. So you've seen about Isaac, you've seen about Jacob, you've seen about Joseph. Look at another character, Moses. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to obey the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his own reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn will not touch either Moses or anybody else who trusted in him. So we'll keep Passover. What's all about? That if you actually do what I'm saying, none of your children will die when they are dying in the rest of the homes. Why would you believe that? Because of he who has said it. And I think that would be something that's important for you to think about. He's a God of victory. Whether you talk about Abraham, I talk about Isaac, talk about Jacob, talk about Joseph, all of them, by trusting God, they ended up enjoying victory. And the basic thing, like we have seen, is a trusted God that can do things they are unable to do and doesn't require their help. And I think the critical thing about this, what we are learning from this, is that this faith was passed from father to son, from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and from Jacob to many others, but to Joseph specifically. And I think that's something important for us to note. And when you note it, you're not asking yourself, am I keeping that kind of promise myself? Am I really doing those things that need to be done? And I think that will be something that we need to ask ourselves. Verse 29 says, by faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. Can you imagine trying to cross a sea? I once was in Port Sudan, which is on the Red Sea. And I said, wow, for sure this is not a river to jump across. It's a sea. But they were willing to stand there to cross, knowing that the one who has promised is capable. And it opened. And the Egyptians tried to follow them, and they ended up dying in the sea. I think that's something that will be important to note. That God has no limitation. You can trust him. And those who have trusted him have seen victory, including crossing into the Red Sea, through the Red Sea. Verse 30 says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. Again they were told, don't shoot, simply walk. They walked every day. On the final one they walked for 7 rounds. They fell, the city on its own fell. They just walked in to take the spoils. I think it will be an important issue that we need to handle and deal with. So what is your Jericho? What is God asking you to do with your Jericho? If he tells you do it, because when these ones did it, they were assured of victory. and they actually did get the victory. Verse 1 says, by faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. What happened? She had heard about this God of this group called Israelis that was winning every battle. They knew it was not them on their own. There was a God behind it. So Rahab, a prostitute, but who could listen and think, was able to say, how would I die knowing these people can help me? And basically, she was not Rahab was not removed out of her city, but she stayed there, but saw deliverance. She was not killed; she survived. That's what it means to trust in God. How would Rahab have sided with the enemy? It is treason. What she was doing was treasonable. And if she was seen or discovered by her people, she would have been killed. But she was willing to take that risk, believing that in the process, she and her family would be rescued. And they were rescued, which was quite something when everybody around you died except Rahab and her family. But if everybody had heard those stories, but instead of thinking about how to befriend them, they were still thinking they are dealing with a stranger. I think it will be important that that matter is dealt with early, trusting in God to do what He has said He will do, even if you don't know how it can be done. But because God is the one who has said it, you trust it. One of the things this will do is that even when you're in the deepest of troubles, if you have faith, you will be like a baby, rejoicing. No, you have no idea how to sort it out, but you are rejoicing and you are happy. And that will be something that would be very, very important to realize. And my hope is that all of us would learn to trust in God and to go with Him. So, what have we said? We have said faith is the substance of things hoped for. We have said faith is important because it makes you wise. Next, I think it will be important we have seen, be committed to your calling. There's a penalty for those who move away from your calling. We are talking about faith during a pilgrimage. Things, even when there are challenges, you are in the middle of nowhere, you still trust in God. You have also seen that it's important to have faith when you are looking at the future, because God will walk in that future with you. And that will be important. We thank God for the many things He has promised to give us. We pray that we verify it is Him promising. Once we verify, we live before we even see it. We believe we have it. We live like we have it until God makes it a realization. That means we'll enjoy the destination, the coming of the gift, and even the waiting period, because you trust in God. You do not wait impatiently. You wait knowing God will do what He has said He will do. And let me just repeat verse 1. By faith the prostitute Rahab became, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed by those who were disobedient. So that's really what we want, to enjoy the things that we could not enjoy, because God is with you, with us, with all who trust in Him.